Marty, thank you for being with us again at 5 a.m. your time.
Not a problem at all.
Yeah, we're just waiting for Kevin to get back with us. He is he's in Palm Springs at the PGA Tour and the American Express, just trying to find a better internet connection. So he will be with us in person very, very soon. He's online, but just trying to get find a better connection. So what we'll do during this time is just to try and kind of maybe get a few themes from everybody who's online at the moment, and try and get a list of something they want to ask Kevin, things that we want to discuss. I mean, Marty and I, we kind of, we have a rough agenda that we're going to work to, but and a few things that we want to get out of Kevin and get him to kind of discuss. But if there's anything specific, and somebody would like to ask him, we can take care of some questions now. And but for those of you that don't know who he is, I mean, we can give you a quick insight as to who we got online tonight. I mean, I guess the headlines would be that Kevin is the 2019 PGA Teacher of the Year, and somebody who both of us are lucky enough to call a friend. Somebody very generous with his time, and a coach that's he's coached 5 Olympians in his time so far, and from the junior academy that he's had up and running in Houston, 2 players have gone on to become major champions. So seven players from his academy have graduated to become full-time tour players, and 2 have become major champions. So that's he's got quite a record as a golf coach, and as a development of somebody who's got expertise in developing athletes, but also developing human beings, which goes way beyond golf skills. So quite a wide skill set. So Marty, I mean, maybe you've got a little bit more personal insight into Kevin from your time with him. I know he spent a lot of time in Australia with you guys, and that's how you originally met. So anything you want to add to that?
I don't want to go too far into what I'm not going to say what KK says anyway, but just kind of my experience. Obviously, first met Kevin through a close friend that most people have heard over the last 4 webinars, through Ramsey McMaster, actually. And it was Ramsey that actually brought Kevin out to Australia, and Kevin will talk about the journey that he's been on, but there was a journey for him that wanted to understand kind of what we were doing down here in Australia, and like a lot of, I think, the best coaches in the world, they don't wait to kind of hear about it. We're at a time where we were able to jump on a plane and go somewhere. So Kevin, like a lot of us, would jump on a plane and go check out what's going on, and try to get a better understanding of kind of where we're all at and how he can best utilize those systems in his own backyard. I think we've got him here. He's sitting under a tree.
Absolutely.
Well, the great thing about this is about 2 months ago, when we first talked to you about this, I said, listen, are you available on the 19th of January? I said, yeah, I'll be in Palm Springs, but I'll be sitting under a tree and I'll talk to you guys. So you're true to your word. I like that.
I thought about climbing up a tree, but I think sitting under is probably safer. So
I hate to say it, at your age, I think you probably should sit under a tree rather than up in a tree. So
I try to climb a tree every week out here on the PGA Tour. It's one of my things. So
love it. I love that.
So if you can't lose your ability to climb. So we don't stop climbing because we get old. We get old because we stop climbing.
Yeah, I love that. But first of all, Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. I know you're at a tour event with your players, so your time is precious there, and you were kind enough to give us some of your time back in April when you chatted with the players. So we've got a slightly different audience, but this time we've got coaches on the line, and as we spoke before, we've had a series of 3 webinars so far that Marty's been facilitating, kind of discussing about what player development looks like overseas, or outside of, or in other countries, let's say. He shared some of his examples of the things he put in place in Australia, a couple of pretty personal case studies that he's had with players over the years, some who have, players that have gone on to have success, and some that possibly haven't had the success that maybe everybody thought they might have done. But then also we kind of took a bit of a deep dive into what player development requires from a coach. So everybody online is given their input through a questionnaire and kind of a self-assessment as to what they need. So kind of our view, our idea for getting you online was to kind of discuss your journey a little bit, and kind of where you've come from, and how you've got to where you've got to, and the journey that you've taken, and anything then that you can share with us that can help the coaches that are online just to develop their knowledge of player development, number one, but also their own development as well, and how we can all get better.
Yeah, well, thank you. You see, I do appreciate you guys having me on, and I was just to kind of give you a little backstory on me. I got into All right, can you hear me? Is that better?
Yeah. Gotcha.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I kind of got it. I got myself into to coaching as a failed player. I had aspirations of being a world-class tour player, and I was a good junior and a good amateur. I played through the U.S. college golf system and had good success there. And in my mind, that justified me going out and trying to pursue it as a craft and to try to make a living at it. And I'd gone to college and finished my degree, but I had no real B plan. It was only 100% in on trying to kind of figure out how to be this great player. And so I wrung myself out for about 6 years trying to kind of figure it out. And I went and talked to a lot of different people about how to do it, try to what I might be missing. And I just, for whatever reason, I just couldn't get all the right elements on the page at the same time. I'd had some moderate success, but nothing that, based on the amount of work I was putting in, it was just, I just got to the point where I just couldn't justify continuing it. So I took a year off. I got away from golf and tried to think about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I was really kind of disenchanted with golf, just because it hadn't turned out the way I wanted, really. I worked in the oil field, and after about a year of working on a rig, and I decided golf wasn't as bad as I thought it was. So I decided to jump back in and decided that maybe I could be a golf coach. And so I really at that point I decided I was going to hold out my shingle and start teaching. I had a good book of business. The community that I was in, the people that knew me well, so it wasn't like I had to go out and put a bunch of advertising together. So I had a book of business pretty well organized. Really the first day I started teaching. And a handful of guys that were friends of mine, they were still on the tour, they were needing some help. So I had some tour clients also, from day one. So that allowed me to kind of to go out and start teaching people out of, at the club level. And my golf IQ at that point in time was high. I'd taken a bunch of lessons and I worked hard on things. And I've heard coaches say, well, gosh, I wish I could go back and give the first, group of people that I gave lessons to their money back. I never felt that way. I knew a lot more than they did. And so I was pretty content to take their, to get paid for my expertise. And then from the very first day that I started, I just fell in love with it. I couldn't believe you could walk out there on the tee, spend 8 hours talking to people about golf, and you walk out of a pocket full of money. I just couldn't get my head around it. It was just the most amazing thing ever, right? So I fell in love with it and decided I was going to really jump into it. Once again, no B plan, just going to jump off just deep in the pool and start swimming and see what I could come up with. And the first thing I recognized is that I probably needed to kind of try to delete my brain about what I thought I knew. Because I carried probably some thoughts and biases about the way I thought things should be. So it's really an opportunity for me to kind of strip it down and just go back to and quit worrying about trying to defend somebody's coaching style or coaching philosophy, or really and really just try to kind of look at it, just try to understand things. So I took it on and really just try to start studying it out from the physics perspective and the geometry perspective. Did a pretty deep dive off into anatomy and physiology, the neurosciences, really just about anything that I thought could potentially help me become a great coach. During that time, we didn't have the internet, so if you wanted to go see somebody, you either picked up a book and read the book that they might have written, or you hopped on a plane and went and saw them. And I was really fortunate in a sense that the people that I called to ask for help were all just amazingly open and shared their thoughts. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate about the golf coaching community is that for the most part, and I would say probably up in the high 90 percentile, people are very happy to kind of share what they know with you. I mean, it's not like it's as guarded as we all say it is. I think my experience has been that if you want to go spend some time with somebody and ask them a question, they're usually pretty, as long as you handle yourself decently, they're going to be pretty happy to chat it up with you and try to share what they know with you. So I did that. I actively kind of started pursuing, trying to, increase my knowledge base about things. It's really interesting how things have changed over the past 25 or 30 years. I mean, I started coaching in 1990, so this would be my 31st year coaching, which is kind of hard to believe. So, but when early back in, there was a point in time, probably not too long ago, let's say 10 or 15 years ago, where the acquisition of knowledge was really important, because if you were going to be able to kind of make decisions and help people, you had to have a knowledge base that would justify you being able to help them. So the idea of study, acquisition of knowledge, retention of knowledge, and then being able to use that knowledge as tools to help people was important. And today, I mean, if you want to know something, you just ask Siri or check Google. I mean, it's changed. And the truth about the matter is, we as coaches need to acknowledge that is the way it is now. It's no longer the way it used to be. So if I want to know what Marty's doing, all I've got to do is check on YouTube, and he'll probably have 10 posts, and I can probably get a pretty good idea of what's going on. And then if there's something that I need to speak to Marty about, I can probably track him down, on one of his social media accounts, and it's all become pretty easy, really. So I mean, we're not for a lack of knowledge at this point. I don't think. I think, as coaches, I think we've got we're kind of at a different time and place, and I'll talk about that in a second. So I spent about the first 10 years of my life trying to assemble this body of knowledge, coaching my club members, and coaching these tour players that I was involved with. And I woke up one day several of them were starting to retire, and I woke up one day and realized something awful. I realized that I'd been servicing a lot of these really high performance players, but I'd never really developed one. And it was just like it was such an incredible moment for me, because I was like, okay, I know that there's places around the world that are developing players, and I'm not developing anybody. I'm just coaching people. And so I started this journey of trying to figure out who were the best developmental coaches on the planet. At that point in time, around 2000, the best developmental program on the planet was Golf Australia and Victoria Institute of Sport specifically. And so, but trying to figure out how to contact the coaches was impossible. They were not like the U.S. coaches. The guys there were just had their noses down working. They didn't write books. They didn't have videos. They just were down there doing really good work. And so trying to find out who was in charge of the program was virtually impossible. And then I had just this great stroke of luck. I looked for about over a year, probably close to 2 years, trying to figure out who was in charge of the program, and couldn't figure it out. And I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I'm pretty resourceful. And I thought, surely somebody that I know will know these people, but I just couldn't find anybody. And so I went to the World Scientific Golf Congress in St. Andrews, and to my great fortune, Ramsey McMaster and Mark Holland were on. Mark was running the program at the time. They got up and made a presentation, and I said, pardon my French, I said, holy shit, there they are. I mean, it was like these ghosts had appeared, So I walked down at the end of this presentation, and I introduced myself to Ramsey, and Ramsey looks at me, he goes, where are you from, mate? I said, I'm from the US. He goes, he goes, I saw that you were the only person that came over from the US. He says, what are you doing here? And I laughed. I said, I'm doing the same thing you're doing. I'm trying to get better. And he just laughed, and that was it. And basically he adopted me, put his arm around me, drug me around St. Andrews for 3 or 4 days, poured a bunch of beer and wine down me and we just had we were just like, he was just best of friends, And so that was a moment in a person that actually changed the way that moment changed my life. It was one of those moments where I ran into somebody that actually, at that point in time, Ramsey was 5 years ahead of everybody. He was doing stuff that nobody else was doing. And at that point in time, if you go back and look at it, Golf Australia and Victorian Institute of Sport and some of the state programs down there had about, I think, 30 males and 30 females in the top 100 in the world. You combine the amateur and professional ranks, and you start talking about the incidence of success in a program where you've got 20 million people. That's a massively high incidence of success. And so whatever they were doing at that point in time was indeed best in class for sure, right? So by definition. And so Ramsey was, I guess something about the way I struck up this conversation with Ramsey and this relationship that we developed. He recognized that I was serious about trying to learn this developmental craft, and he basically opened the gate and invited me to come down and spend time with him and introduced me to everybody, including one of the guys that's on the panel today with us. He introduced me to Marty, and I mean, I would go down there and he'd say, well, go see this guy today and go see this guy tomorrow, and you go see this guy. And his favorite thing to do was to hand you the phone, and there's somebody on the other end, and you just have to strike up a conversation, right? I don't know if Graham Walker, who we all know, is, my first introduction to Graham was Ramsey's got a guy on the table in my office. He presses his phone. Graham's on the other end, and he just hands me the phone. I have no idea who I'm talking to, but that was just the way he did it.
It's so true.
And I think the thing that Ramsey did, besides being 5 years ahead and caused us all to kind of, to dig and think and really take it on, is he plugged people together better than anybody that I imagine. He bridged people together like nobody I've ever known. And I can tell you today, if there's no Ramsey McMaster, there's no Kevin Kirk. I can just tell you that. He changed the way I thought. He gave me tools that I never really thought existed. He taught me a craft. And every night when I say my prayers, I always thank God that I met Ramsey and that I was blessed to spend 10 years with him, and I still miss him every day. I know that I'm sure Marty's spoken to you about Ramsey and his impact on him, but anyway, that started my venture into this world of developmental coaching, and since then I've really chased down some cool things. I've had a chance to spend time with Istvan Bali, who's the father of long-term athlete development. I've also, one of the things I've done actively is try to get and speak very specifically with people outside of golf. I think that we as golf coaches, are probably, where it becomes a little myopic in a sense that we've talked about golf to the point that there's not much that we don't know, and we don't need to investigate more about golf. I think we know enough about golf. I think, the big steps we're going to have kind of going forward are two things. First off, being able to cross-pollinate with the people from other coaches, other industries, other types of leaders, and learn how they think. And the second thing is, and I think I'd like to kind of hear Marty's thoughts on this and Yussi's thoughts on it, but I think we're at a point now where there's so much data that's floating around, that's being generated around golf. The ability to be a competent coach and somebody who can move the needle is going to boil down in your ability to be able to process your way through that data and learn how to think and it really has to be a lot more about that going forward. I don't think it's more about data acquisition as much as it is interpretation and the ability to think your way through things and try to think about what's the implications of what you're doing, what you're saying, how it's going to roll out in 3 to 5 years. And so it's, my focus, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, today is really trying to be competent. I don't have to be, I want to be I don't have to be is right. Being right is not that big a deal to me anymore. Okay. Because depending on who you talk to, right can change a lot. It's based on perspective, But what I do want to be is I want to be a competent coach. I want to be somebody that can move the needle and help people get better at any level, whether it's a club player, a developmental player, or high performance player. And so my focus on on my craft currently, I've been blessed. I've had exposure to the best minds in the game, a lot of cool people outside the game. I've developed a cool toolkit that I can use. My focus right now is no longer about trying to kind of track down more objective and more evidence-based stuff. It's trying to be it really has to do with being able to use those tools and to try to be competent and try to actually help people. So that's, I'm exhausted listening to myself talk at this point. So I'm going to have to kind of shut it down and maybe kind of open it up to discussions, have Marty or Jussi kind of weigh in.
Yeah, I agree that.
Go ahead, Marty. Sorry, mate.
No, I think, and part of our conversations over the 3 previous webinars, we've sort of delved into a lot of this stuff. And as you said there, KK, I think there's so much information out there now, and there's so much data, as we say down in Australia, that I think it's very important that we actually know what we're doing with it. And that first experience of, say, for the coaches in Finland or say used to doing a national camp, that first experience, that first time that you come across an athlete in front of you with all this information, what you say next is so important, because I've had experiences where players have come up to me years and years later. They actually can remember the first time they met you. And I think you've got to be very, very careful with what's around and what's important to that person. I think a lot of time as service providers, we think everything's important, or especially what we do, but what's important to them can be very different than what we think.
Yeah. So, I mean, the difference between data and analytics is relevance. Okay. So as you look across a big sheet of data, okay, what's relevant? What's actually going to move the needle?
That's right.
And so the ability to understand that is really, I think, is really the, kind of the next step in coaching. Every person listening to this podcast, or this present on this webinar, has access to more information than we've ever had in golf. All of you, and everybody does, including me. So okay. So if I'm gonna make a difference, okay, I have to figure out what are the data points that I'm looking at that actually are relevant, they're actually important, right? So that takes competence, and I keep going back to the idea about being able to just make sure that you're taking time to understand things well enough that you can actually take the information that you've got and actually use it in some sort of helpful manner.
One of the big things that I personally got out of your webinar in the springtime, Kevin, it's almost 12 months ago, which is hard to believe. You talked a lot about kind of your pillars of success and the kind of things that are the eight things that are really important to you in terms of player development when you kind of go through it with players. And one of the things that really struck out for me and which we tried to do, and kind of related to your last point, is opening up the world of possibilities. Okay, so what's possible for a player? Okay, so rather than kind of discussing, we're very quick to kind of discuss, I guess, using the word limitations. Okay, always going back to, okay, well, maybe what are you not good at, and what do you need to improve at? Whereas, framing it differently, it's like, okay, what's actually possible for you? And I think that's quite a big thing that really struck with me from our last conversation with you, was that you've taken the approach that it's all about looking at the world of possibilities.
Yeah, I think that probably looking at it, the people that I've been around, whether it's in golf or outside of golf, that have been successful, by definition, have achieved things, all tell basically the same story. And they talk about the idea of that at some point in their life, they had to sit down, they looked at the field of possibilities, of what was possible. They set a very specific intention or desired outcome, and they focused 100% of their attention on making that happen. And I do think the Patrick Reeds of the world and Jonathan Vegas of the world, and these kids that we've coached that have had significant success on the PGA Tour, they all have that. They're all very, very intentional. So I don't think you can, the idea of, oh, I'm just going to go out here and try to do my best. Your best is not good enough. You have to be much, much more precise and much more clear about what it is that you're trying to do. And you have to be careful with your intention, because it will manifest if you select an intention and it's within this, the spectrum of possibility, and you focus your intention on it, it will manifest. It's just the way the world works. So knowing that, the very first thing that has to happen when you're sitting down with somebody in a coaching scenario is to be clear on what their intention is, not what your intention is, but what the intention of the person in front of you. And sometimes it involves making sure that you spend time with them to help them clarify that. Because you have a kid walks in and says, "Oh, I just want to shoot even, I want to shoot even par." Okay, well, if you want to shoot even par, then the intention around that, here are the things that go with that. Here's the benchmarks. You have to hit 60% of the fairways and 60% of the greens and get it up and down 60% of the time. You got to get up and down 40, 50% of the bunker. And then you got to take 30 putts. So we can benchmark once we get clear on what the desired intention is, right? You can start doing your assessment. You can start screening to that intention. But without intention, it's like a ship at sea with no rudder or no, it's pointless really. And I don't, I'm not interested in coaching anybody that cannot develop a clear intention, just because it drives me and them both crazy. It's just a zero-sum game. So in my mind, intention is the idea of looking at a spectrum of possibility, identifying one of those very specific outcomes, and then focusing your attention on doing what's required to make that happen. And it's interesting because, a lot of the things that once you get that process done, a lot of the things become pretty innate. So if a person wants to become a better putter and saying they want to take 29 putts around and they're taking 36, the questions that they'll come up with will be much, much different than they were than just saying, without having the specificity of that intention. Right. So a lot of things become pretty innate. And then the second thing is that it's almost like once you collapse that wave function, you start focusing on it, you start getting pulled towards that outcome. And you also find that things find you. I mean, I wanted to become a developmental coach, right? I focus 100% of my attention on it. And then all of a sudden I run into Ramsey. Okay, there he is. He shows up. I tried to find him, couldn't find him. One day he just shows up. Right. But that's just because every day when I'm waking up, I'm like, okay, I've got to take another step here, try to figure out today, how I can find the people that are in charge of this program. So I think with the players that we coach, I think it's very specific. We have to be very, very intentional and help them become very intentional and specific about what it is they're trying to do. And then with our own coaching businesses, we also should be really intentional about, who are we, what are we trying to be, and just making sure we're super clear on that.
Ask one question, Kevin.
Yep.
About you mentioned kind of servicing the players versus developing the players. How would you kind of define the differences in those? Is it short-term versus long-term, or is there other kind of state of mind stuff, or how would you define those?
Well, I think servicing a player is in my mind, is really developing a relationship with somebody that's already a really good player, and then helping them continue to try to move forward and trying to. There is a developmental component to that, but it's not like finding a 14 or 15-year-old kid or a 12-year-old kid and taking through all the developmental stages and actually building, helping them assemble, a set of skills that's going to allow them to be a world-class player. In my mind, that's more developmental, so that's in my heart is actually in that developmental process. I mean, a lot of the guys that I'm coaching currently that are on the tour came out of our developmental program. So it's like, finishing up the back part of that. And I really, one of the things I still miss a lot is the actual development of those 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old kids. And at some point in time, I'll get back to that. I've got to get this group of guys, to whatever point that I'm going to get them to. And then my point is that the development, it's a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of time, but it is so rewarding and so incredible to watch a group of kids that you watch grow up. You watch them develop skills, and you watch them, to be able to kind of go out and compete at these different levels. And, every now and then you get to watch one put on a green jacket. It's pretty cool stuff.
Now, KK, I had a bet with Hank and Use that you're actually going to get some questions from the audience, and it won't be just us talking. So I've actually got a bowl of wine on the line here. If we have some questions from anyone involved, and I think, but honestly, for the guys and girls listening, there's not too many times that you can, literally we're at a PGA Tour event live with one of the, I'd arguably probably one of the best coaches on the planet, and not just a golf coach, but as a coach and as a human. So it's a great opportunity to kind of ask a couple of questions. Evan, just thinking for, I know that we chat about a lot of stuff there, KK, is that, we say someone like Patrick that you've worked with for such a long period of time. And I know you're one of the first ones that made me understand this or made me clear about this, was the kind of noise and distractions. And, what a PGA Tour event can look like. I know you're very big on the kind of the neural stuff, and I actually talk about a lot of how much neural and energy a player can spend throughout the course of a week to be best prepared on the back nine on Sunday. So, can you give us a little insight and kind of what potential, what a week looks like, how much actually work, if you want to look at it as sort of work hours at the venue, goes into preparing these guys to play?
Yeah, I think, it took me a long time to figure that out. I mean, I initially I was under the impression, I came out of the kind of the Faldo kind of, Hogan model, where there's a massive amount of ball beating was required. And just, so when I was playing, I mean, it was not uncommon for me to hit 700 balls a day and chip and putt like a beast, and then go to the gym. And I mean, the amount of work I doing was just really exaggeratedly high. Part of what that did, though, is it actually warped my perception about what I thought should be, should be happening when I played. So to be a world-class player, a top 10 player in the world, you got to be able to hit the ball in the fairway 70% of the time, on the green 70% of the time, 70% up and down, 50 or 60% of the bunker, and then 29 putts. So if you've got a, if what, I drove myself crazy because I was working so hard that in my mind, I figured, okay, that should be about 90%. And I had nobody around me that could help me regulate that or help tell me any different. And so somebody told me any different, I told them they're crazy because I'm working hard. And so my tolerance for error relative to the reality of the game was skewed, and it broke me. That's what broke me ultimately, is my inability to meet these standards that I had set for myself. So thinking my way kind of through the, trying to kind of think of my way, in retrospect, looking at it, when I went down and spent time with Ramsey and those guys, there was still quite a bit of work. There was still quite a bit of work happening. Simon Webb had kind of come to the States and he was spending some time with at my place, and he and I were spending a bunch of time together. And we were looking at our players, and one of the things we began to notice is about most of them had about a 3-week window that they could play well into. And then they would get off into about the 4th week out on the road, they would fall apart. They would just collapse. And it didn't matter how good or how bad they were playing. After that 3rd week, they just couldn't operate at all. And the longer they stayed out there, until they actually took a break, there's nothing that you could do to stop it. No amount of putting practice, no amount of chipping practice, no amount of gym work, no amount of nutrition, no amount of compression gear, no amount of body work, nothing that we threw at it seemed to work. So we started down this idea that there might be something happening neurally in the brain that was happening, and we coined the term neural fatigue, just among ourselves, just talking about that. We felt like these guys would start experiencing neural fatigue to the point where they started negatively impacting their performance. So long story short, we ended up kind of running into some guys that knew about that. They were really good medical doctors from the Navy SEALs, and they were working for Red Bull at the time, and they understood it to the point where they could share with us a little bit about how to start looking at it. And what we found out is that each one of the windows of trainability in terms of being able to recover neurally, you really only have about 5 hours a day that you can actually work somebody and not have a negative neural consequence the next day. And now all the programming that I was doing for my athletes was 7-8 hour days minimum. I mean, I just couldn't see how you could not get 7 or 8 hours of work in. And, it just fed my belief system about, the harder you work, the more you get. If you want to be good, you got to work. I mean, all the bullshit that I floated around in my head about it, So what I found out is that okay, once you move past that 5th hour, the 6th, 7th, and 8th hour, it starts negatively impacting the way the athlete, their ability to recover from that was going to negatively impact their performance the following day. So you start stacking up these 7 and 8 hour days. At some point in time, you're going to get to where even if the athlete is getting enough, is sleeping well enough at night, they're not able to recover from the workloads. I ran it by a good sports scientist, Dr. Greg Wells, in Canada. We got we did some testing and found that our athletes were actually indeed experiencing this neural fatigue. We used heart rate variance as kind of the tool, which now is Whoop has become pretty popular, and I think it's a lot easier to track today than it was then. But we did some neural testing on our athletes and realized that the athletes were indeed overtrained. And so I took this to this sports scientist in Canada, and I said, "Hey, listen," I said, "I've got a question." I said, "We've got these golf athletes, and here's their neural profiles." And he just says, these kids are overtrained. I said, "Well, you don't understand, Doc, in golf." And he stops me in the middle of the sentence and says, "Kevin," he goes, "listen to me. They're overtrained." I said, well, Doc, you don't understand in golf." He says, "Stop. Please listen to me. Please don't say another word. These athletes are overtrained." And so once I finally was able to stop my thinking and my neurosis about it and started listening to what he had to say, he said, you can really get about 5 hours is a pretty good starting point. Some athletes may have a little bit greater or less tolerance, but you need to be able to get all your work done in a 5 hour window. And so all of a sudden I was like, okay, well, that is actually possible. So on the PGA Tour, if you've got a 5 hour window, the guy comes out, warms up, and plays. That's it for the day. He doesn't need to go back out and hit a bunch of golf balls at the end of the day, right? Not if you're expecting him to kind of be able to kind of have his nervous system be sharp and ready to go the next day. I'm not saying that a kid can't play 10 hours of golf on a 36 hole day, but the next day he's going to be wiped out. Right? I'm not saying that you can't have a training camp where you start pushing the kids pretty hard, and then they're they've got 5 hours of golf practice and a couple hours in the gym and then an hour of the sports psych. And I'm not saying that they can't do that, but the next day they're gonna suffer a negative neural consequence. They're just not going to be as sharp, no matter what you say or what you feed them or what time you tell them to go to bed. Right. So the 5 hour window seems to be something that I would encourage you to take a look at. We're starting to see some of that information emerge in kind of in the leadership world. Some of the top corporate guys in the world have gravitated towards 5 hour days for the same reason. And so I think it's something to kind of take a look at. And the other thing is that the only thing that really is going to allow the athletes to recover is sleep. So you got to make sure that they're getting, the quality of sleep is good. The quality and quantity of their sleep is good enough to recover from the work that you're asking them to do. Right. So because if we're asking the kids to do work, they've got to be able to recover, and the recovery is just as important as the work. So that was,
sorry, Kevin, to butt in. I mean, just to kind of combine a couple of the questions that have come in from the guys there is, one is asking about Patrick's routine, for example. I mean, how, where is he at right now? I mean, he's kind of, like you said, alluded to, he's kind of at the top end of his development spectrum right now. So where is he with all of that? And then kind of as an add-on, if you're working with younger players, like where would you kind of, at what age would you kind of start drilling those things in? And maybe kind of splitting up that up the training with young players just to base their skill sets.
Well, I think you start kind of looking at a couple things. First off, you look at you start talking about Patrick. I mean, Patrick, when we started down this 5 hour training day road, I sat down with Patrick and told him what I found out, and he said, "Sounds reasonable to me." When I first met Patrick, I thought he was crazy. Because I mean, I went to a tournament with him, a PGA Tour event, his very first PGA Tour event, and I trained him around the house, but never really traveled and watched him play much on the road. He would go out, warm up, he would play golf, and then he would go back to his room, and he wouldn't come out till the next day. He'd order for room service. He would never leave his room. And I'm like, dude, you cannot do that. You're going to get smoked out here. These guys are in the gym there. You cannot just play and then go to your room and hide, you know? And turns out he had it right, you know? So he, you know, so the, you know, on the backside of that, he started bolting all these other things onto his daily practice, and his performance started suffering. And I'm like, well, gosh, just hang in there. It's going to get better. And the more he did, the worse it got. So we kind of started down this 5-hour road, and I sat him down and took him back, and I said, hey, listen, I said, when I first met you, this is what you know, my first tournament I went out to with, this is kind of what you did. I think you may have had it closer to right than I thought you did. Let's try to put you on this 5-hour program. We'll just make sure we get our work done in this 5-hour window. And he went on from that point, and we played 16 months. He only missed 2 cuts, and those were both after majors, where he knew he shouldn't have played, but he had made a promise to the tournament director that he would show up and play in these events and miss those cuts. But it was just because he had pulled the work back so that he could recover. And he plays a lot, so I think you can play a really active schedule as long as you manage the amount of work and rest that the athletes are taking in on a daily basis.
So another question's come in just regarding, like, for example, at the
Are you a bowl of wine, Kirky?
Yeah, there's quite a few of them coming in, buddy. So you're going to do well out of this. That's all it took. It just took a charismatic.
Thanks, guys. Makes me feel good.
And Marty, no shitty wine.
No, it won't be. Trust me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So on that, I mean, just kind of as a follow up to your last point, I mean, you know, it was quite well documented. You know, Patrick stayed up quite late one of the evenings at the DP World Championship.
Yep.
You know, he was the last one to leave the range. I mean, but I guess he was in the mental space to do that, or in the physiological space to do that. You know, right after his round, right?
Yeah, I think, you know, Patrick and I are currently on a pause. He's been working with David Ledbetter for the last 45 days. David floats in and out of his space. This is the second time they've had, you know, started trying to do some work together. And I think he had sent Sean Hogan over there, who's one of David's disciples, to the guys that works for David, to be with Patrick that week. And I you know what they did in terms of how much practicing they were doing. I don't know. I know that when he and I go together, we were really super strict on that 5-hour rule, and with this idea that you know it makes a difference, and so that's what that is.
Cool. Another one here, Kev, for you. I mean, kind of, I guess going back to you know what you're talking about, starting developing athletes from an early age, starting work with them regarding physical training, kind of on season, off season, weight training versus body weight training, kind of any basic principles that you follow, or anything that or do you think it kind of just depends on the individual? I mean, obviously, you know, you've seen it from Ramsey's world, and you've seen it from a number of other principles, or number of perspectives, should I say. So anything that you've kind of learned along the way that's guided you on that front?
Yeah, I think that, you know, from looking at developmental pathway from, let's say, kind of you know, U10s, I think you start, let's say U12s, I think you really have to start focusing on physical literacy, trying to kind of have kids that are like ridiculously physically literate. So they have a, you know, a huge movement vocabulary. So encouraging them to do just a host and wide variety of activities, different sports. And the analogy I always use, if you've got a U12 kid that's only played golf, you know, from a physical motor skill perspective, he may have, you know, if you have a box of Legos, he may have five Legos in his Lego blocks. But then if you have a kid who's been playing a bunch of other sports and developed a bunch of other, you know, modalities of movement and thinking and activity, you may have a kid that's got, you know, another kid that's played a multi-sport athlete that's done a bunch of different things, may have a box full of 1,000 Legos. And so with 1,000 Legos, you can build some really cool shit. I mean, you can, right. And so And you start looking on the PGA Tour and the European Tour, and what we're seeing a really super high instance of success of these kids that are multi-sport athletes that have played a ton of other sports, and they've just moved into golf kind of post-puberty. So I think that the golf training U12 needs to be a lot less golf centric and a lot more athletic, because the things that some of that stuff that you kind of gets wired in before puberty, right? And then once they go through puberty, just making sure that, you know, that you do a fair job of making sure that you help them through that developmental, you know, that phase of going from puberty where their bones grow and the muscles go on stretch, and they don't know where their bodies are in space, and make sure that you help them to try to become as functional as possible. And then slowly but surely start adding on the, you know, the power and the speed. I think power and speed get tossed into the equation, you know, probably a little too early in a lot of cases. I think you can develop great speed for U12s, probably with speed ladders and throwing and jumping and doing things with your body weight. I don't think, you know, Olympic body lifting and trying to do, you know, thrash things around the gym is probably going to be that useful. And I'm not saying that there's not a time and place for it, but you just have to dose it out in the right times and spaces. So, so I do think that, you know, I'm a movement freak. I love it. I love the idea of training movement. So you know, my thoughts currently about training are more movement based, and trying to kind of make sure that, you know, people learn how to move well, and then you can put them under load and try to increase the speed of that movement. But I'm not a big, you know, I don't, the amount of, you know, if you have an athlete who's running through a periodized program, and you have, you know, 90 days a year to work on hypertrophy, I think that's fine. But you damn sure better make when they come back out of there that they can move, right? Because I think that, you know, the thing that you always have to be careful with is when you start adding mass, and you start kind of adding load, you know, conceivably you can change the way people's body works. And so you just have to be mindful of what you're doing. And it's just you know, it's one of those things you just got to keep. It's like a doctor. You just get every day, you got to walk in, you got to take the temperature, and you got to have an idea where you're trying to get to. And you know, Marty and I've talked a lot about this. A lot of times is the whole damn process needs to slow way down. We just need to think about trying to get things done more over the long haul, and not try to do things as, you know, so if I want to build, you know, increase somebody's strength, look at it as a 3-year project, not a 1-year project, you know, or a 5-year project, you know, where we build it up organically, and you get all the right, you know, the right pillars set in place so that they can handle the extra load and handle the extra speed. Their nervous system can do it, and their brain can do it. And so it takes a lot longer than you think. Unfortunately, it doesn't, you know, none of that happens very fast.
I think there, KK, that especially now and you see Bryson out there firsthand, that, you know, I just noticed Evan back down here in Australia, you know, everyone with all the social media stuff and everyone trying to hit it as far as they can, and seeing what he's done and what he's done to his body. And I think we're in somewhat a dangerous time in golf with, you know, people trying to move a certain way that it's unsustainable over a period of time. I'm not saying that about Bryson. He's obviously built a frame that can support a lot of that, but I'm just in my own backyard. I'm watching stuff here going, it's just wrong.
Well, I think that the verdict's still out on Bryson. I mean, you know, he had a nice go at the U.S. Open, and he's actually been able to kind of move himself, you know, learn how to neurologically move the club faster, which is interesting. I don't think that, I'm not sure that there's much use for it out here. I mean, particularly the patterns he gets into to try to generate that speed. I'm not sure it's good for long drive, but I think long drive and golf are two different things. I mean, golf is about ball control. It's not about how far you can hit it. And I know that there's a lot of people that talk about the ability to hit the golf ball far, but if you hit it far and you can't hit it in play, it's pointless, right? So here's one of the data points that really helped me sort that out, right? So one of the things that moves the needle in golf is second shot proximity. Everybody's probably pretty happy with that, right? How close is your regulation shot on the green? So second shot on a par 4, third shot on a par 5, and first shot on a par 3. How close is that to the hole? The best players in the world hit it closer than the guys that don't, right? Now, the reasoning that everybody starts saying, well, okay, well, if that's the case, then off the tee, then we should be hitting as close to the green as possible. That's what the shots gained stuff would tell you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The only problem is that doesn't take into consideration the effect of the rough. So once a ball goes into the rough on the PGA Tour, the proximity doubles. All right. So to give you some scale on that, if you're playing from 100 yards, let's say so the margin of error on a PGA Tour is 5% of the distance. So let's say that from the fairway, a player's average shot's going to be about 15 feet. All right. From the same distance out of the rough, it's going to be 30 feet. Now, if you take that 30 feet and you scale it back into the fairway, you're actually, the fairway shot equivalent is from 160 yards. So it's a 60-yard penalty every time it happens. 6-0. So it's a lot. All right. Now that nobody ever talks about that. Everybody's wanting to hit it far, but if you're hitting the ball in the rough 4 more times around, you better be hitting it 90 yards past where you're looking to make a difference. But 30 yards won't do it. All right. So your birdie production in the fairway 30 yards behind your maximum distance is going to be 50% higher. Right. So if the US Open, everybody says, points at the US Open. Well, at the US Open, I was there, the fairways were as fast as the greens. And they had a little tiny bit of pitch and it was a little bit windy. And so the person that led driving accuracy that week was, I think, Lucas Glover, hitting the fairway 50% of the time, which is about 30% lower than normal.
Yeah.
So now if they're all playing out of the rough, being 60 yards up there makes a difference, right? So that's the way he won the US Open. Okay. But if the fairways were a little bit softer and you have a bunch of guys keeping the golf ball in play, 30 yards behind him or 40 yards behind him and hitting in the fairway 75 or 80% of the time, now it's a different story. So you got to understand the way the game is played and the metrics that are involved and making sure that you're trying to turn the right screws. I don't think bringing long drive, into golf, I think it's an awful idea. I think it's the instance of injury, the negative impact it's going to have on your movement patterns that affect the way you hit your irons and all the other clubs. I think it's ridiculous personally.
Kevin, on that, where do you see the game? Where do you see the game going with on the female side? Obviously we're trying to kind of look at things in trends, right? So, like you alluded to there, that everybody's just trying to hit the ball further and, just pretty much as far as you can, right? But where do you see it going with the girls right now?
The funny thing is, I don't think golf cares about gender. I really don't. I think the numbers are the numbers. And I think the numbers on the women's tour and the numbers on the men's tour in terms of what drives performance are almost identical. So I would be more accountable to the performance data about what does the game ask you to do? One of my favorite stories comes from triathlon, right? So Mark Allen was the best triathlete in the world, Ironman triathlete in the world for 10 years. He won the Ironman 7 times in a row and then retired. And so he tells a story about how he kind of got started, and he had come from a swimming background and decided he was going to go out there just to take the race on for fun. He says he kind of got out of the water. He hops in the water. He takes off swimming. He's got this great swimming background, and he hops out of the water, and there's a couple of the guys that peel off the front of the pack, him and one other guy, and they get out of the water, and he says, I hop out of the water, and right there next to me is the world champion, Dave Scott. And he says, I'm so excited. He said, I hop on my bike, and he says, I'm going to hop on the bike and I'm going to ride out here to this, this 112-mile bike ride. He says, I have no idea that even the direction the wind's blowing. I'm just such a, I've got no idea what I'm doing. So he said, hop on the bike. We're going straight downwind. And he said, I'm cruising out there about 25 miles an hour thinking the cycling thing's pretty easy. And so he says, about 2 miles before the turnaround, I pulled up beside Dave Scott. And I said, hey, Dave, what do you say we go for a run after we get off these bikes? So Dave looked over at him and he said, he looked at me like I got 3 heads. He turned back around and started back in against the wind and starts just putting the hammer down. I've got no cycling background. I'm trying to keep up with him. I blow up, I have to stop the race. He said, so the next year I've kind of gotten this bug. I want to try to do this race. And so I upscale my cycling. And then the next year he does basically the same same thing to me on the run. And he goes, so I'm sitting out there, and I've started the race twice. I've never finished the race. I decided I'm going to take one more shot at it. I go out there, and about 10 miles, 10 miles left in the race, Dave Scott looks over at me and dumps me like a, dumps me and leaves me in the dust. And he goes, I thought I was going to retire. He goes, I thought this is the stupidest thing. I'll never beat this guy. And he goes, one of my buddies kind of caught me in a moment. He says, Mark, he says, you're just not thinking about this correctly. He says, you can win this race. He says, you just got to take some time and try to not worry about trying to beat Dave Scott. You've got to figure out what the race is asking you to do. So to win this race, you have to swim at this pace, you have to bike at this pace, and you have to run at this pace. And so I became really interested in it. He said, so I took it on. He said, I went up to the Olympic Training Center and I talked to what the guys thought the physiological limits were going to be for the marathon on the backside of that race after the swimming and biking component. And they reckoned it was about 2 hours and 40 minutes was about as fast as you could run on the backside of all the demands from the swimming and biking. So he said, I spent a year training for a 2:35 marathon, and I got to where I could do a 2:35 marathon, which for marathoners is not fast, but for triathletes is really fast. And so he said, I trained at 2:35, and he goes, and then I show up at the race, and then so when I saw him make this presentation, he had these little video film clips of all this stuff that was going on. So, and he shows this film of him getting 6 miles left, and he looks over at Dave Scott, and he's got the goods. He's trained for this 2 hour and 35-minute marathon on the backside of this race. And he runs like 2:37 on the backside of the race and ends up winning the race, and Dave Scott never ever beat him again. So the moral of the story is that he quit worrying about trying to beat Dave Scott and trying to do what was fashionable, and started trying to ask himself a set of questions that said, okay, what does this race need me to do, right? So at the elite level, the best males and females in the world hit the ball in the fairway 70% of the time, and knock it on the green 70% of the time. They get it up and down 70% of the time. They're up and down 50 to 60% out of the bunker, and they take 29 putts. And you can like or not like that, but that's what the game is asking them to do. So I'm more concerned about really trying to be accountable to the benchmarks and not worry so much about, because if you can do it, you can do it. Point in case, Jim Furyk, right? Jim Furyk was one of the best players of his era, and nothing that he looks like even resembles golf. He doesn't even hit it that far. He's broken 60 twice, right? And he's won every big tournament and beat everybody. I mean, arguably the best player of his era, right? And nothing of it resembles golf. So what I'm more concerned about is are the athletes competent, and can they cover their benchmarks? I think that's probably a better measure of how to get somebody into the winner's circle, or to try to help them develop, than trying to kind of chase what's fashionable, whether it's ground force, or whether it's whatever it is that people like to chase, right? The next fashionable thing that kind of comes across the grid. And the one thing that I would say about the current coaches, I mean, my concern about the current coaching situation is this love affair that they've developed with objectivity, and all the I mean, I get it, biomech and force plates and launch monitors. I get all that stuff. It gives us some better tools to measure. But if you're making decisions based on what that machine's telling you, you're headed down a really dark and ugly path. All right. You have to start kind of thinking past that and say, okay, what is the game asking the players to do? And try to be accountable to that, and don't try to be accountable to the orange box quite so much.
So true.
And by the way, I'm not throwing technology under the bus. I use it. I use it. But my point about that is, I mean, I just can't get past my head. A guy standing on a range hitting a golf ball and then looking at his phone to see what the numbers say instead of watching the fucking ball. Pardon my French.
That goes back to what we said, at the start of this presentation, that the data is great. It's good to be there, but how's it going to help the person in front of us?
Correct.
And unless it can help, as you said, it's not dismissing. We all use, you've got it, I've got it. We've all got all the systems and stuff like that. It's more about how those systems are used and how it's helping.
Yeah, because you can actually cripple people. You can actually cripple people with that information if you're not careful. You can. I mean, I can promise you. I mean, I watched Jim Furyk at the 2014 Ryder Cup, and it was a moment that changed the way I saw things, because he was in a pod with. It was him, and Jim. It was Jim. It was Furyk and Patrick. He had made his first Ryder Cup team. Jordan Spieth and Matt Kuchar. And as it is in those formats, they were all kind of playing the different formats and different golf balls. And the old guys were playing the young guys, and they were playing a couple $100 a match plus all the presses. And Jim Furyk, we were playing at Glen Eagles, the rough was up, and Jim Furyk single-handedly beat those kids out of a couple grand apiece. And he beat them because he was competent, because off the tee, he put the ball in the fairway, most of the time. And then when he hit it towards the green, it usually went on the green, kind of towards the hole most of the time. And then when he missed a green, if he didn't chip it, and he tapped it in, and every time he hit a putt, it looked like it was going in. And Kuchar's got it coming out of both barrels, and you got these two young kids with these beautiful golf swings that just don't have that level of competence. I mean, they've got things that they do so I came back from that, and literally watching Furyk, he was 25 to 30 yards behind the guys off the tee. Right. But what he was competent. So I do think focusing on competence, understanding what good is really important. So having benchmarks about what good is, and making sure that you're super clear on that, and trying to be more accountable to that and a little bit less accountable to the, to what we think some sort of perfect modeling might suggest. I mean, taking that approach, I think you'll find that you can do less invasive things to people, or you're not invading them quite so much, trying to help them. I know all of our intentions are good, but if I've got, if I'm sitting there looking at some sort of force plate signature that I'm not happy with, and I've got Jim Furyk in there, and I start messing with it, and I make him worse, if he can already do it, then who am I to say that his, my job is to actually learn how he's doing it and try to support that and not try to change it.
Yeah, I've just read. I've got a quote earlier on from Pete Count today. That he's kind of, that everything he's now teaching takes him back to where they were 15 years ago.
Correct.
In terms of coaching, is that possibly we're trying to reinvent the wheel too much.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than actually looking at what it is that you really need to be good at to survive out there.
Yeah. I think maybe taking some time to try to figure out how people generate score, what good is, for different levels of players, and try to kind of help them train to that and to become more, like Mark Allen did, try to figure out what the game is asking of them, and then try to help them become better at that.
Jeff Ogilvy, KK, who obviously you've met on the road as well. Obviously he's back here, but he talks about Jim Furyk as probably his favorite player, and then saying that, like, in playing the game, it didn't talk from a ball striking point of view, but he says he literally plays every single day. He'll play Christmas Day, he'll play every single day. And one thing that he's experienced with him was that he can hit a bad shot, but he never hits a stupid one.
Yeah.
He constantly plays within himself. He knows where he is, that internal sort of instinctive, this is what I can and can't do. And his course management is just arguably probably one of the best on the planet. Well, they kind of has to be able to be competent for that period of time. You really do need to know.
Yeah, and I think that once you understand what good is and what the percentages are that you're trying to kind of play to, you can make better decisions, right? So, I don't hear people talk about that much in coaching. Unfortunately, I think it's a bit of a void, but I do think that the best coaches that I've been around and are actually quite they're either innately quite good at what we're talking about, or they've developed the capacity to be able to do it.
Have we got any other questions there? Did
you ask the question about dividing the youngsters into training groups?
Kevin, any thoughts about at what age you should start dividing youngsters into different training groups based on their skills?
I think I think it's an interesting question, and I think depending on who you talk to, you'll get a lot of different answers. I do think that there's probably some time for kids of like skill to kind of be together in terms of, there's the problem with age is it's not really a good determinant of a lot of things. When you have let's say a 12-year-old kid, you've got, first off, relative age. So, developmentally, you could have a kid that's actually developmentally actually closer to 10, another one that's actually 14. So you have this huge discrepancy in size and speed and athleticism, in a lot of those different age groups. The other thing that you did get into is, when they're born in the calendar year. If a kid's born like on the day one of a cycle, and the other kid's born the last day of the cycle, I mean, you conceivably could have another full year of development. So you have those questions, and you also have the training age of the athlete, how well trained they are relative to, so a lot of those things have to be taken into consideration. And I think probably a couple of things you don't want to do too much of. I don't think fast tracking is a very good idea. So even if you have a young kid that's actually, physically developed or technically developed, trying to move him up and have him compete with older age groups, I don't think is a good idea. I think young kids training with some of their older counterparts is a good idea, because they can kind of see what that looks like. But what I don't think is a good idea is having a 10-year-old play against 14-year-olds. I just think that's a really bad idea. Case in point, you look at Michelle Wie was probably a good example of that. We had probably the best female golfer of my era, American female golfer. And so it wasn't like, they didn't let her beat all the 12 and 13 and 14-year-olds. They, at 12 and 13, they decided, well, shit, she's good. We're going to go ahead and move her up and let her play against the women. And that lasted about 6 months. And like that wasn't enough. Then we're going to make her go play against the men. So, I mean, so now you fast track this girl that is so good, and she starts having these illusions that she's going to play the men's masters and play on the men's tour. I mean, and it just warps her brain to the point where first off, her perception of reality gets pretty badly distorted. But probably more important than that, she loses the ability to win. She doesn't know how to win a golf tournament, right? On the other side, you watch Tiger Woods, his dad, held him back. He would let him go play at some events from time to time, but it's always like pulling him back and then making him, beat his counterparts, beat all the 12-year-olds and all the 13-year-olds. The Williams sisters in tennis did the same thing. Their dad did a wonderful job of not fast tracking them, in spite of the fact that they were probably good enough to play women's tennis at 15, professional tennis at 15. He just held them back and said, you beat all the 15-year-olds. And then when you turn 18, we'll talk about playing professional tennis, or, 19 or whatever. So I do think, those are the things you have to be aware of, is fast tracking. I do think young kids getting a chance to kind of at least be in an environment where they can see the older guys train is a super cool thing. And maybe kind of splitting them up in some teams where you have some older and younger kids, playing together in some sort of different formats or events, whether it be a team or something like that. But I think you just got to try to make sure that you let a 12-year-old be a 12-year-old for as long as you can. And my thoughts about it is always to try to kind of slow things down, not speed it up.
Couldn't agree more.
I guess on that, I think this is for both of you, both Kevin and Marty. Something that's kind of fascinated me for most of my coaching life is why, you look at amateur players, for example, that, you mentioned Michelle Wie there, for example, and many others who have got to a really high level as amateurs, but then just completely flatline when they turn pro. Maybe if you guys could kind of, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as to why that happens. And then B, what can we do better to actually, I'm not talking about anywhere in particular, but just, what do you think are the reasons why that happens so often?
Marty, have a go?
Yeah. I think I might have touched on this a little bit. I think a lot of it is actually probably a discussion I did have with KK years ago, which I think a lot of the players, as KK mentioned, they're competent to play at that level, and they've got the game and the skills and the tools around there to be at that level. But once they get to whatever that next level is, they really start to change things. They start to change their team. They start to change their perception on what they feel they need to do to be winning out there or whatever it is. So So my experience is, you know, the noise and distractions of the circus, the tour life as it is, unfortunately puts a lot of warped views on kind of what that player needs to do. I hear it a lot. You know, the guy go, well, this guy's doing this and he's doing that, and not understanding that. I think the best players out there, and KK lives with this every week, is, you know, is the ones that they're not asking questions. Everyone's asking questions about what they're doing. They're just in their own little bubble, just doing their own thing, and everyone's kind of looking and going, well, what's Patrick up to, or what's this guy doing? Because, you know, obviously it's working. So I think, you know, I guess as us as coaches and providers and stuff like that, empowering them, making sure that, you know, they have got the tools and they are going to be faced with stuff like this in the future, and expose them to maybe some, you know, stories that we all know of and been around, and how things have changed, so we don't allow these people to, you know, to get too far off what makes them great.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Marty. I think every player has a blueprint about the way they generate success. And I think the ability to identify that blueprint and stick to that blueprint and not try to change it too much long-term, I think is really important. It's hard to do because, to your point, you know, the tour is really just ripe with you have a lot of people that are going about a lot of different ways, and somebody starts having some success, and, you know, you have a peek down the range, and you have a dinner with somebody, and all of a sudden there's a new idea floating around in your head. And, you know, there's just it's a fertile ground for confusion. And so I think that, you know, that, and the things that get the players in trouble is usually going to be, you know, comparison thinking, you know, comparing themselves to somebody else, you know, perfection, trying to perfect, you know, do things too perfectly. And then, you know, just, you know, their capacity to be able to worry too much about the outcome instead of just focusing on, okay, this is what I do that generates my success, and I'm just going to continue to try to do this and try to make it a little bit better. Because literally, if they keep doing what they're doing and get a little bit better at that level is a massive jump.
It's massive,
right?
Love it. Hank, anything you want to touch on, or anybody else?
Yeah, maybe that was kind of a question I was supposed to ask that you asked. Is there kind of the differences in players that kind of makes the differences, so that how can you kind of spot that even in junior age when you're developing players, that do they have kind of the personal traits that you can kind of see, okay, this player is going to be great because they might be physically coming behind of the same players in the same age group, but still you can kind of see that this has the skills and traits to take him really far in becoming a successful player, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that you also kind of look at are some of the soft things that nobody sees, like, you know, the culture, the warrior culture that the athlete brings to the table. I mean, the best guys I've been around are absolute complete warriors, whether they're male or female. And so helping them develop a culture, you know, making sure that they're able to tell themselves the right stories at the right times, and their you know, their internal self-talk is, you know, that they're able to do that. Because they're going to confront challenges. They're going to have tough moments, and so they have to be able to manage that stuff when it comes up, and not panic and overreact and do things that move them down a path that starts becoming harmful to them. And so I mean, and that's where the coaching is really, you know, that's what our job as coaches is, to help set up not only the movement patterns, the training systems, but also help them develop their culture that allows them to be able to handle the challenges that are inherently in that competitive environment.
What about as coaches? Have you seen the besides of technology and data being available? Have you seen coaching changing on tour? Like, what makes a successful coach?
Marty, you want to speak to that?
Have I seen it change much on tour? Not really. I think the best guys that are out there are still out there. I think there's a lot of it's actually been really interesting in the last little period of, everyone's been parked down and not been able to move, and I know it's a little bit different in the US, but there's a lot of, I think I might have touched on this in one of the webinars, or there's a lot of social media stuff out there portraying kind of what looks like high performance coaching, but I think the guys that are out there, the guys that obviously that we work with, and KK and Graham Walker and Hugh Maher and Pete Cowan, if you actually kind of speak to all of them, their heart and soul still in development, and they've all come from that pathway. And Sean Foley, who's a close friend of KK and myself, I had that conversation years ago. He was very fortunate, a bit like Kevin. All of a sudden was kind of gifted these great players, but really needed to know and understand how to develop players. And I think one of Sean's biggest things, and what he'd be very, very proud of, is someone like Cameron Champ, who was taken from a kid through to winning on tour. That says, as great as it was that he's coached Tiger, I think deep down Sean probably enjoys that one a little bit more.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's always going to be trends that you're going to see, and you're going to have fads and things that just the nature of kind of of sport and performance and stuff like that. But I think at the end of the day, it's really about nuts and bolts. It's about having, being competent skill wise, understanding what good is, and being able to train for competence, train for the ability to kind of be able to do it when it matters. And so I think as long as you can kind of stick to remember it is what is you're trying to do, and not to get too distracted by the, all the crazy things that you see out there. And just remember that it's a lot of it just about just getting the nuts and bolts right.
Great, thanks. There's one
Kev,
question in the chat. You want to go through that, Jussi, or?
No, go ahead.
So there's one question about I think it's for you, Kevin. The workload is that should the 5-hour rule be no matter which age group, stage, career, off season?
I would say that probably, it's the stuff that we've done is mostly around post-puberty. I don't have any real hard data about prepubescent kids or adolescents. It would seem that their capacity, they're having to rest a lot because they're just growing. It takes a lot out of them. I would say that it's important to kind of keep in mind that when you do have a kid that's going through that really rapid growth phase, it's important to kind of really slow the train down when that's happening. Make sure that you're not trying to, overload them in the gym or ask them to compete well. They're just not capable of doing it. Their bones have grown, the muscles go unstretched. So their center of gravity is changing in their body. Neurally, they don't know where they are in space and time. And so, I think it's just going to be important to kind of just, it's always literally, this was what Ramsey would always say. It's just, it's always it's a population of one. Mark Bolt reminds me of that every time I speak with him, just saying, they just have to deal with that one person in front of you, because everybody's a little bit different in terms of what they can tolerate, not tolerate, what they're naturally good at, what their weaknesses are, and how are you going to try to kind of manage them and their blueprint and try to help them play better. So I think a lot of it has to do with just slowing the thing down, trying to get to really understand the person in front of you, whether they're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, or, a tour player or a 75-year-old guy that's just trying to kind of, just to kind of stay healthy and keep playing. So to me, it's just really about making sure that you spend enough time on the front end to get to know these people, and then try to take it from there. I mean, unfortunately, there's no hard, fast rules about any of that stuff. These are just simply guidelines and things to consider when you're trying to kind of train people.
Here's one for you, Kev. And actually Marty as well. I mean, both you guys have been at the sharp end for quite a while now. How much of where you've got to has been luck? Like do you feel like that it's something that you've created yourself, or has some of it been circumstantial? I know, Kevin, you alluded to it earlier on, that you meeting up with Ramsey was kind of somewhat circumstantial, but in the grand scheme of things, how much of it is what you make yourself, or is it just has some of it just been circumstance? I know, Marty, that's deep for early in the morning for you, mate. I know.
I need another cup of coffee. It's ironically, Kevin and I's stories look somewhat similar because it puts one guy in the mix as well. I was fortunate that I met Ramsey when I was young. I was a guinea pig for Ramsey. A lot of his weird out there exercises, that was me as a 15-year-old working through it with him. So I've been fortunate enough that I was around this guy, and he was traveling the world, and I was just amazed by. He would come back, and he had a picture of Henrik Stenson and this other guy next to him, and Pete Cowan, and I was like, who the hell's Pete Cowan? I got no idea who this person is. And when I got my job, I was fortunate enough, and Ramsey, I think had a big role in putting me in that role to some degree, because how much influence he had in the golf industry in Australia and golf around the world. But he told me straight up, like literally, I got the job, and he's like, okay, you're coming with me, and jumped on a plane, and all of a sudden I met Mark Bull, I met Pete Cowan, I just flew around the world with him. And it was pretty soon after that I realized that's kind of, it's how I need to learn, because I'm very much that way. And back then, as what KK said, the internet wasn't doing much, and you couldn't really research much, so we had to get face to face with these people. And I think it was, my focus and intent was pretty similar. I was going to be the best player, but I learned pretty quickly that I love coaching and want to be around the best in the world. Is it luck? I think all of us, there's got to be an element of luck in there. But I think if you put your focus into anything that you wanted, and that's something that you sort of wake up every single day wanting to do, you'd hope that you'll get or definitely head in that right direction. That's my little thought. But yeah, I think the Ramsey story sort of, I was just lucky enough that he decided to move from Scotland and park himself in Melbourne, Australia.
Yeah, I came from a blue collar home. My dad worked in the oil field, so hard work was something that has always been natural to me. I don't struggle with not wanting to work hard or try to be better or all those things, right? So, I was fortunate that I picked up that from my the nerd kind of the question you answer when you look at people and say, is it nature, is it nurture, and some of that just what I grew up around, so I this idea of sitting and being waiting for things to come to me it doesn't settle well with me. I've always felt like I'm happy to go work, I'm happy to go track things down. That's part of the fun of it for me. So using that as kind of a process along that pathway of doing that on a daily basis for a long period of time, I've been enormously lucky. I mean, the presence of divinity and great fortune and serendipity in my life is scary. I mean, all the things the fortunate things that have happened to me, but I can also can promise you that serendipity is probably, has a lot to do with the fact that I was actually out, actually pushing it pretty hard. And so, you used to hear Gary Player and Hogan, those guys talk about, the harder I work, the luckier I get, and so I think there's some truth in that. I think, if you're out there on the path, if you're working hard every day, you're going to have these moments, these things, these people that come into your life apparently out of nowhere that change the way you see the world, right? I mean, Ramsey did it to me. I've had, Istvan Bali did it to me. Tom House did it to me. Just changed the way I saw the world. Jerry Lynch changed the way I saw the world, right? And I never saw any of those people coming. I mean, they just literally were, becoming PGA, teacher of the year. I mean, that feel like Forrest Gump. It feels like it fell out of a tree, So I've got this, but my point about that is that, it's not, I do think it requires work to be good at anything. I mean, if you look at all the mastery modeling and all the culture code and talent is not, talent's overrated, all these books that have been written about it, the people that seem to do well, they've all put in some hours. I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't come easy, but so my interest in what I was doing, my desire to be good, my blue collar background, all, primed me to put me on a pathway where I could have some of the most incredible and lucky things happen. I mean, I really feel like Forrest Gump most of the time. So.
Love it. I'm going to start calling you Forrest from now on.
I know, I thought the same thing.
That might stick, which is going to be scary, right? So,
I tell you what, I'm going to change the contact on my phone right now.
Especially when you got your runners on and you're going for a little jog.
and I ran and I ran and I ran and I just kept running. So.
And now you're only about 6 holes behind your player, so that's
It's so funny.
Beautiful. Well, look, I mean, I from my point of view, I haven't got much else. I mean, I think, all I can say is thank you guys for your time and, kind of sharing that. I think it's kind of fitted really neatly with the previous 3 weeks, or the 3 seminars or webinars that we've done. It's been kind of a really cool addition and a really cool story to kind of what Marty has discussed with everybody over the previous weeks. So I can't thank you enough, Kevin, for taking the time to sit under a tree and talk to us, and Marty for getting up so early in the morning your time to add more to the mix. Fantastic.
No, thank you, KK. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it, and I just it's always an honor and pleasure for me to be the presence of people that are trying to get better. I just love the Kaizen spirit, of all of us trying to kind of to try to improve our, ourselves and each other and trying to kind of make it all better. And that was one of the things Ramsey always reminded us of, part of our job is to leave it better than we found it. So things like this clearly do that. I'm not, we get together and we talk and you just don't know, in the course of conversation, something comes out of somebody's mouth that could potentially kind of move them in a different direction and possibly change the way they see the world or change the, their ability to help people or change their life. And so, while we want our work to be transactional, we also want it to be transformational, and things like this are that way for me. And I want to let you guys know how much I appreciate you inviting me to sit in.
Well, I mean, the one good thing that's come out of COVID is the opportunity to have conversations like this. So,
correct.
Marty, you and I have talked about this a lot, is that, I think where everybody was kind of busy traveling the world and whatnot, we just didn't have a chance to kind of really just sit around a computer talking like this. But so at least something good has come out of it. We've had you guys on 5 or 6 times now over the course of a year. So fantastic.
It's greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much.
You, guys.
Marty, hope we get to see you live and get you to Finland at some point. So.
Hank, I'm building that boat.
Great. You need sponsors?
Yeah, I need everything.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what.
I go to Finland and then I'm going to park it somewhere off the coast of Mexico, I think.
Yeah, you don't want to park it here. It's going to get frozen, so
That's
park it somewhere warmer.
Why don't you pick up Kirky on the way and you guys come over here? So
that's already sorted.
Yeah,
I've already got that sorted. Yeah.
Fantastic. Guys, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Kevin, I know you've got work to do with in Palm Springs, so best of luck for all the guys this week. And
all the best this week.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. All the best. Happy New Year. Let's make it a great 2021, huh?
Likewise.
Sounds like a plan.
You too.
Thank you, Forrest.
Thanks, Forrest.
Peace, boys.
Beautiful.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.